The podcast you are about to listen to is not a medical podcast, nor is it designed to diagnose a condition. While there are medical experts on the show, any questions regarding medical care or concern should be directed to a primary care physician.
The team at INVAX is dedicated to delivering new, personalized immunotherapy approaches to improve outcomes for people living with glioblastoma and other solid tumors. Leveraging decades of validated research and technologies, INVAX's unique platform is designed to capture a tumor's full antigen signature and use it to stimulate a patient's immune system against remaining tumor cells. INVAX, advancing a new approach to personalized cancer immunotherapy. Hey, it's your friend Shannon Traphagen, and welcome to the Game On Glio Podcast. Here we tell the stories of brain cancer and tumor warriors, clinicians, medical experts, and those in the grief and loss community. Thanks to all of you for making our podcast one of the most popular podcasts globally. If you enjoy our show, please consider writing a review. Also share us with a friend and follow us on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, and our website.
This episode of the Game On Glio Podcast is sponsored by GT MedTech and Gametile Therapy. Learn more at gtmedtech.com. Season 4 is also sponsored by INVAX, personalized whole tumor-derived immunotherapy. Learn more at invax.com. This episode is brought to you by the Alliance Advisory Group. Learn more at allianceadvisorygroup.com.
Have you ever read a book or come across a saying that you didn't think twice about until years later? The first time I read Hemingway's The Old Man and the Sea was over 8 years ago. It was a great novella to read, but I didn't think much of its themes or messages. Looking back on it now, I realize that the lessons inside the story may have been preparing me for the road ahead. In The Old Man and the Sea, the main character, Santiago, faces extreme hardships in life. Fishing is his only means of income to put food on his table. He's poor. He lives a simple life. He's an old man, and he befriends a young lad named Manolin, who, while having to fish on a more established boat, forced by his parents to make better money, he still makes time to help his friend Santiago. In the story, Santiago goes out by himself one day. He goes out way too far away from the shore. He comes up against many struggles, storms, sharks, and has to fight to keep the biggest marlin he's ever caught because it will bring in the most money. He's determined to make it back to shore with his fish in tow. However, the sharks are attacking the fish. What this story teaches is perseverance, resilience in the face of adversity, the importance of personal integrity, and the understanding that even when physically and emotionally defeated, one's spirit can remain unconquerable. So why do I bring this up? Because there are times in life when, despite everything we do to stay upright, to keep persevering, to keep pushing forward, to keep putting one foot in front of the other, there are times when we just feel defeated. We talk about grief a lot on this show. What we don't talk about enough is finding a way for our human spirit to keep going when the rest of us just wants to give up hope. When grief and heartbreak happen over and over and over again for years, how do you find it in you to keep going? First, you must understand the difference between our human brain and our human spirit. The brain gives us the ability to learn, helps us navigate complex situations. It drives our waking thoughts and helps protect us during traumatic times, fight or flight, for example. However, it's the human spirit that is more powerful because it represents our intrinsic ability to persevere through adversity, to maintain hope even when we feel hopeless, to drive change fueled by our emotions, not our thoughts. It fuels our creativity and allows us to overcome challenges and achieve seemingly impossible things, even in the face of extreme difficulties. It's our spirit that we must rely on when grief happens time and time again. And during the holiday season, grief can feel even heavier. But the spirit, which lives in our core, in our gut, can guide us and can help us feel a tiny bit of hope again. Like Santiago, we must keep fighting, and we will find our way back to shore. Today's episode with grief coach Emily Bingham taps into our human spirit. We talk about the hard things that life throws at us and how we find our way. And while this is the last episode of season 4, which is so hard to believe, and we will be on hiatus for a couple of months, we will be back with a season 5 this spring and a whole slew of amazing and profound guests. As all of you head into this holiday season, where feelings, grief, sadness, joy, and love can all coexist and can at times be exacerbated because of the holiday, remember that every season has a beginning, a middle, and an end. And new seasons always come, and with it, renewed hope for something good to happen. We sit down with our guest Emily after a brief word from our sponsor.
Our time is precious, especially when you or your loved one is diagnosed with a brain tumor or the cancer has spread to the brain. That is why GammaTile is here, the only FDA-cleared bioabsorbable implant specifically designed for the brain that delivers immediate radiation at the time of brain tumor removal. No more waiting to start radiation. No more of your precious time spent going to outpatient radiation treatments. With GammaTile, focus on what truly matters: your recovery, your strength, and cherished moments with loved ones. Discover GammaTile centers near you and find hope from inspiring patient stories at gammatile.com.
We have such a great episode to kind of prompt our holiday season and to kind of get everybody into the right mindset as, we enter what can be a very stressful time of year. And because of that, and with that, I want to bring on a friend of mine who I've really gotten to know and somebody who's doing amazing work. She has used her social media platforms to really elevate what it looks like when you walk through grief. She has been very raw, very real. At times, I don't know how she has done it. She is a mother of 2, my friend Emily Bingham. She's a certified grief educator, a coach, and the founder of Move Through. Move Through, she developed after the loss of her husband in 2019 to uveal melanoma. And in a few short years, it's evolved. It's blown up into this amazing business, and now she does grief coaching, complete with free resources, online programs, and even in-person retreats to facilitate community healing, empowerment, and growth. Emily, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me here, Shannon. I'm excited we got to make this happen.
I am too, because you are a busy woman.
Yep.
And that's kind of the name of the game, right? I mean, especially as a woman owning your own business and trying to navigate doing your own work and working for yourself, it's not easy. You're hustling all the time.
Yeah, and then throw on the solo motherhood too. It's a little cray. Cray.
Cray. It is cray. So let's start with, so many know your story because you really elevated your social media platform by putting out there what happened to your late husband, Ian. You were fairly graphic at times. You shared a lot of pictures. You shared the rawness of your grief. There were many times where you cried openly in front of others to really show people what it meant to move through that process and really elevate that term, moving through your grief. For those who don't know, Emily's late husband, Ian, died at a very young age in his early 30s, correct?
Yes, 32.
32, from uveal melanoma, which is such a rare form of eye cancer.
Mm-hmm.
He passed away in 2019. What were those first few months after his death? What did that look like for you? Because you also had 2 young kids, and you guys had been together since you were 18?
Exactly.
You guys basically grew up together. And then
Right.
here you are, in your early 30s, all of a sudden a single parent and a widow. What did those first few months look like?
The first few months were incredibly surreal. I mean, I just remember we were in Hawaii at the time and going outside and swimming in the ocean and looking up at the sky and just feeling like, is this really happening? It just felt like a dream. I judged myself a lot for that because I had this image in my head that I should be falling apart on the floor, crying, like not getting out of bed. And that was just not my reality.
Mhm.
I was detached. I was numb. I really couldn't feel anything.
Mm-hmm.
I think because I had kids, I didn't have the choice to really wallow. I really shifted straight into survivor mindset and asked myself, well, what now? Like, how am I gonna figure this out? How am I going to rebuild an entire life, without my person in it? I learned with time that grief really isn't something to be figured out. You kind of just have to be in it. My approach during that time was very like, all right, you got to do this. So I had a lot of anger. I had a lot of anxiety, like once I actually started to feel something, but it still wasn't sadness.
Yeah.
I was really resentful. I didn't want to be with my kids. I was like, I didn't choose to do this alone. I didn't sign up to do this alone, right?
Mm-hmm.
So fortunately, I had a really strong support system. My parents were like there for me. And I didn't really have a problem asking for help because it was a matter of survival. I didn't see any other way through it but for me to go and take these big energy emotions and to physically move them through my body. But yeah, I think my grief kind of went from numb and detached to anger and resentment. I got some kind of coping skills with movement and exercise. And as the chaos of the first year started to subside and my feet kind of planted on the ground and I came into a place of acceptance around Ian's death, that's kind of more when sadness and loneliness and some of these other emotions really started to come up.
The second wave.
Yeah.
I call it the second wave.
Absolutely.
I'm curious because you brought up a point about how it's not that you didn't love your kids. You loved them immensely,
Mhm.
but you just didn't want to be around them. And you were just struggling with this idea of being a single parent. You didn't ask for this. So how did you come to terms with having those feelings and also help them navigate the loss of their father?
This was a really hard one. I had just had to be really honest with myself. I was like, I can't be a good mom to my kids if I don't want to be around them. Like of course, I loved them, but I was so resentful of my situation and so angry that I didn't want to be taking that out on them. So that's where I would ask my parents for support. For me, I can tell when I need to like process an emotion is when I get irritable. So I would be like, Mom, Dad, can you take the kids? So I have 1 to 3 hours to just be and to get calm and connected and clear back into myself and not just like in this reactive place where most of the time I felt like I was living. So that was number one, was like taking care of myself first. And then the kids were so young, honestly, that they didn't need a ton of support early on,
Okay.
at least in terms of grief.
Mm-hmm.
Theo was 1 year old. He was still in diapers. He was just taking his first steps. So his grief at the time didn't exist. He didn't know, he was just a baby. So I was just parenting him as I would at that time. Izzy was 3. She knew that daddy was gone. She knew that daddy had died, but she didn't really understand gravity of that like he was gone forever. And so she was just confused. Like she wasn't so upset. Like I think she would take cues from me more or less.
Okay.
When she was confused, I just tried to explain to her what had happened in the most age appropriate terms that I could. Izzy, your daddy died. The cancer made his body stop working. This isn't your fault, right? Like trying to speak to her fears. He won't be coming back though. And there are other ways that we can talk to daddy now. We're always connected to him through the love. And, when he comes and visits us as a sea turtle, right? So kind of introducing him to the concept of spirituality. But I think I really just tried to normalize the experience for them as much as I could, answer any questions. And then, I do think that for like the first 3 months, Izzy had a hard time sleeping.
Okay.
She couldn't verbalize why.
That was her way.
Yeah, she didn't want to wake up, to see that mom was gone too. Because that's kind of what happened is she woke up, she said goodbye to dad, and then he was gone after she left the room for a little bit and came back, and he had been taken to the mortuary. And I think for her, she just could not understand what was happening.
So that was her body's way of processing. It's like, okay, this happened to daddy. What if it happens to mommy?
Right. So she just wanted to be really close to me.
So now that they're a little older and it's been a few years, has their grief transformed? Have they asked more questions? Have they become more curious about where he went, or do they want to see pictures of him, or have they kind of gotten used to, okay, this is our normal?
Yes to all of that.
Okay.
I think I've tried to introduce to them the concept of duality. Yes, it's sad that daddy died. Most 32-year-olds don't die. And Izzy now, she's 8 years old, and she sees that a lot of her friends have dads and that not a lot of them have died. I think she had one person in her classroom whose mom or dad had passed away, right? So that she's starting to understand that not a bad thing happened to her. And where I kind of try to direct the narrative is for them to see, and we're doing okay. Look at this amazing life that we've created, just the three of us too, right? So not trying to, I'm trying to just present the facts so that they can then, and be as objective as I can, so that they can kind of create their own meaning from the experience of loss. But they absolutely have questions about dad. They have questions about death. I mean, my kids talk about death all the time. And I think it's kind of jarring for some people because they don't know, our society doesn't know how to talk about it. And so to hear it from a 6-year-old who's yeah, my daddy died, and just it's no big thing, is kind of a surprise. But yes, we look at pictures all the time. I try to keep his memory alive. We talk about connecting to him through signs and in spirit. And they do have grief now. Izzy was underneath her bed with a picture of daddy and a candle, crying the other night. And, we just make space for those big emotions. It's all okay.
I'm curious, in those first 2 years, what do you think was the biggest challenge of being a widow in those first 2 years? For me, for example, during that first year, anger didn't really come up for me. I asked why, and I kind of got stuck in that rabbit hole a little bit. But for me, it was the vulnerability. I suddenly felt so vulnerable, and kind of like Izzy, when she was 3, all of a sudden I was like, oh my God, who else am I going to lose? And so I was trying to hold even tighter to the people that were part of my inner circle. And subsequently, I lost some of my in-law family, which I was not expecting at all, blindsided me. There was some anger coming from some other sides, that were friends of his and stuff like that. And a friend that I lost, that it shocked me. And so the vulnerability, I was so vulnerable, and I felt like I needed to protect the people that I had left. And that was surprising to me. I wasn't expecting that to come up at all. And that was a big driver for me that first year. And then the second year was when the loneliness really just sank in.
Yeah.
And then trying to figure out, really getting used to that new normal. So what was the biggest challenge for you, do you think, that you butted up against in those first couple of years?
Yeah. And thank you for sharing about that vulnerability. I totally feel that. Just everything's so raw.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you're when is the next shoe going to drop here? Because your whole bubble's been burst, So yeah. So for me, I would say that really the first year / 2 years was logistics. I was thinking about this, but honestly, it was just mass chaos. It just felt like someone had taken my beautiful life that I had, so intentionally created, and pulled the rug from underneath me, flipped it upside down. And it was now just figure this out. And it was just so disorienting and paralyzing, and just so many different pieces. And what I really struggled with was not getting ahead of myself. I wanted the answer yesterday as to how I was going to figure all of this out. This sounds crazy, but even when Ian had cancer and I was in anticipatory grief, I would think about dating other guys before he was even gone. And it was just this weird fix-it mentality, or not weird, because I think anything is valid in grief, right? We all move through this.
It's that constant planning. It's trying to take control of the narrative that's been created. That is so much a part of our human nature, is to try to just hold on to some kind of control. And you do that by thinking ahead, thinking forward, planning.
And I would catch myself in it. I'd be ew, gross. I don't even like, that's horrible. I don't want to go there at all, but it's just, yeah, like worst case scenario thinking, and then trying to find that like safety net, that reassurance that I'd be okay. But it was just, yeah, managing the kids, shifting from being kind of a stay-at-home mom to head of household, navigating grief. I feel like grief was just its own entity in itself, just the huge emotions, the intensity and the frequency of them, and figuring out how to regulate my nervous system. And I know this is a lot of things, but I kind of put them under the umbrella of logistics, because it just felt like I needed to kind of take care of all of these different moving pieces to kind of find a place of peace and calm around me and within me.
Mm-hmm.
And even loneliness was a piece of that for me too, because I would lie in bed at night and just spiral, like you said.
Mm-hmm.
My thoughts would just get really negative. I'm going to be alone. No one's going to love me. Who's going to want me with all of these kids and this grief? And just, it took me a while to ground down and be like, okay. So number one was like logistics. And then the second one for me, which I still struggle with to this day, is identity and purpose. Like, I'm not going to lie. And I coach people on purpose, but
Mm-hmm.
I had this golden formula that I think our society kind of lays out for us in terms of, you go to school, you get the degree, you get the job, you find the guy, you fall in love, you make a family, and there, boom, you're good.
Yep.
After Ian died, it's like that formula just kind of fell apart for me. And I don't know, it just didn't feel true. It's like I had to really, I kind of started to realize like how much of that had been programmed into my system, my existence, and how I was kind of just like following it blindly. You know, the past 5 years really have been this hard and beautiful journey of coming home to myself and asking myself the questions of like, who really am I? What really do I want? What type of mom do I want to be? What type of business person do I want to be? Am I doing it for outside validation to prove myself? Right?
Mm-hmm.
Like all of these like really, really big questions that have been hard and confusing. And at the same time, I'm so grateful for, because I feel like this has been my path to truth. And yet I still struggle with it to this day.
That's so weird that you bring that up, because for the last 3.5 years, and I had the same mindset that you did. Go to college, get the degrees. I was kind of one of those people that everyone said, you're just forever college, because I just kept going back to school and getting more and more degrees and more certifications. And, find the guy, fall in love, have your soulmate, buy a house, like everything, get married, like everything was in order.
Yeah.
And then, work towards having kids. There was a plan.
Mm-hmm.
There was a plan. There was something you were working towards. There was something you were shooting for. It was the same thing. And it all unraveled. And for me, it wasn't just all of that. It was, okay, now not only do I not have the partner and the spouse, I don't have the kids either.
Mm-hmm.
So what the heck is my purpose and meaning?
Yeah.
What am I doing? What is this? And that truth and that purpose is something that I still question, okay, what's my purpose right now?
Yeah.
What am I supposed to be doing? How am I supposed to be helping others? Am I putting my best foot forward for myself and for those that I'm trying to help? I don't know if you ever thought this, but when I was younger, I was like, oh my God, your late 30s, your 40s. I mean, that's so old. And, you have to have all the answers by the time you get to that age.
Yes.
and now here I am. And I'm like, are you kidding me? I'm
Right.
like, have all the answers. If I have one answer, I'm having a good day.
But I think this is like, as you're saying this, what's coming up for me is, I think we human beings are actually meant for this deeper inquiry and like coming back to ourselves and checking back in with our intuition. Like I love the questions you were saying, like, am I putting my best foot forward? Am I serving in the way that like utilizes my gifts and strengths? And like, I don't think we teach that. I wasn't taught that. I was told what would make me happy. And I kind of just blindly followed that formula like you did.
Yeah.
Yeah.
During some of your hardest times, because it has now been about 5 years, but you still butt up against some really hard days, but you've had an amazing outlet for yourself. Talk a little bit about that, because for you, and you speak to this often, that everybody has a different way of moving through their grief. And you outline this in your book that was just published, which we'll talk about in a little bit. But exercise for you and being out in nature was a huge healing component for you.
Yes, absolutely. I think for me, just because the energy of the emotions that I was experiencing, which anger and anxiety, I needed to physically move it through my body. Had I probably been experiencing more sadness, which I would say is like a heavier emotion, it kind of slows you down a little bit. Like when you're sad, the first thing you naturally want to do isn't to go to a HIIT workout, right? It's usually like, I'm going to like lie in bed and cry. But for me, yeah, like I needed to physically move the energy in my body, and all an emotion is energy in motion. So it's kind of cool that I did what this felt very intuitive to me, and it makes sense, right? In hindsight. So the fitness component helped me kind of calm my nervous system, move it through to get to a place where I could be more calm and connected to myself. And then maybe start to ask myself why, like what's beneath this, kind of getting curious around what is driving that emotion. And if it was like a thought or a story or just a part in my grief that I needed to be with more and just tend to. So that was huge. And then I think getting out into nature for me helped. It kind of planted the seeds around spirituality, and it made me feel like I was less alone and perhaps connected to something greater than myself, that it would be okay. You know, I think you can like walk by a forest that's been burned down. There's been a forest fire or something, and then starting to see like the signs of growth and rebirth, right? Like it was kind of like this beautiful reflection of like, yeah, my whole life has been charred and is like complete ashes right now. And also like, what can emerge from this?
You know, that's such a great visual, because if you think about it, that is what this process is, isn't it? I mean, you look at when a volcano erupts and it literally just decimates everything around it. But within a year, 2 years, you've got these weird wildflowers and new life that is growing up underneath the ash. So there's rebirth, there is regrowth. Life continues to go on, and it finds a way through all of that darkness and all of that hard stuff that accumulates from disaster.
Yeah.
I think that is a great way to paint that picture.
And it's integrated too. It's not just like the forest fire. It's like, oh, well, we're done with that one. Scrap that. Like where I think sometimes, or the mindset used to be with grief is, or when someone dies, is you just say, all right, disconnect, let go, move on, da da da. Whereas like it's cyclical, it's regenerative. It's the death is what is actually what gives way to that new life. And it's connected to what was there before, right? So to think of like, that's what we're doing as well. Like we are the versions of ourselves now because we loved our person and we lost them. And it's like, nothing is ever lost if you think about it through that mindset.
Right.
It just changes form.
And part of that form, part of that change for you was the work that you now do. You know, you made the decision to become a grief coach and to reach out and to help others and to share your story. What precipitated you making that decision, and what does that look like? What does being a grief coach look like? Kind of paint that picture for the listeners.
Sure. So the reason I got into grief is because, you know, at about 6 months after Ian died, I was like, I don't know what I'm going to do with my life. Like I thought about going back to kind of my corporate marketing job, and I was just so jaded. I was like, I don't know, I can't do that. I need something that feels more meaningful, more significant. I wanted to be talking about grief. I wanted to be using my experience to help others, because it just felt really aligned for me at the time. And it gave new meaning to Ian's death. I thought, if I can go through something this horrible and still help someone with the lessons I'm learning by going through it, like it just softened the blow. It softened how horrible it was. So that's kind of what got me into this space. And I think because I was just so invested in figuring out this grief thing for myself, I already had all of the tips, the tools, the insights, the education to be able to help others. And in a group setting, you kind of have the coach who's like a moderator, inviting everyone to share. So there's a lot of safety created around expressing your emotions. Nothing is off the table, right? Like allowing people to share the deepest, darkest parts of their experience, their struggles, the thoughts. Like, yeah, I was relieved after my husband died of cancer, right? Like that to someone who hasn't been through the experience probably sounds so quote unquote wrong, but to someone who's actually, you know, watched their person suffer through cancer and then feel that sense after caretaking for months and years, right? Like they get it.
Yeah.
So there's just immediate validation. There's an immediate sense of just feeling seen by others. And I think a lot of the suffering that happens in grief is we get into our head. It's our little brain being like, you're doing this wrong, Shannon. Emily, you
Mhm.
should be further along. Like, why the heck did you do that? Right? Like, we're criticizing ourselves for all of these normal experiences. But because grief has been just this like taboo subject that we don't talk about, grievers have been left to figure it out in isolation. And so having the group, having the container, and then having someone who's like a couple more steps ahead of them to be able to like reflect back, you know, hey, well, why are you feeling that way? Why are you criticizing yourself? And giving them tools, like real practical tools to tap somatically or to breathe or to ground down if they're having a panic attack because they're so overwhelmed by this new normal, right? Is a way to help, I would say, grievers feel a little more empowered in the process.
Right.
And to come back home to themselves so that they can be their own best guide. Because like I said, everyone's journey is so unique.
It's really powerful. I can't imagine though that it's easy. So you were getting all, these certifications, this extra training, diving into and deciding that, okay, instead of just going back to a 9 to 5 and sitting in an office and having somebody else tell me what to do, I'm gonna go out and do my own thing and honor Ian in this way and really help others because it just feels right to me. How hard was it to start this business, to do this, especially with young kids, being a single parent? I mean, being a woman in the in an entrepreneurial industry, it's not easy. So, what did that look like for you?
Well, it's funny because in hindsight, okay, I'll do two perspectives. When I was in it, move through was like my ray of hope. It was healing for me. I wouldn't say it was hard. I was energized by it.
Interesting.
It was like the silver lining. I was like, I'm finding something that I'm passionate about, that I can help people. Like people are telling me like how much my words are shifting things for them and allowing them to move forward with their life. It was 100% the silver lining and kind of what I needed to move forward. So I got a lot of inspiration from it. I got a lot of energy from it, a lot of momentum. It's what helped me move forward, quite literally. In hindsight now, what I've kind of been reflecting on is it was a little bit of an escape of my own grief. So even though I was talking about grief all the time on the platforms and sharing about my story and all of these like good things were happening from it, right? Like I got like TV interviews, I got brand collaborations, of clothing line, all this crazy stuff. No one had ever, given a damn about what I had to say. But here, all of a sudden, I have like 300,000 followers, right?
Yeah.
And so it kind of like, it felt good to kind of be in the spotlight and to be acknowledged. And what happened though, that I didn't see at the time was that all of that good kind of then, I kind of bypassed the bad a little bit, like it was kind of like the grief was there, but I'm just going to focus on all the good that's coming from it so that I don't have to actually deal with the bad.
Right.
And so healing later on, like where I'm at, like more now and in the past recent years has been kind of slowing down on the business front, really seeing that and making sure that I went back to tend to my grief.
That's really powerful to be able to pump the brakes when you've got that kind of momentum going on and saying, okay, I can't get lost in all this either, is really vital because it is easy to do. And I can completely understand that description, what you're saying about how it really helped you, because launching my company and starting the podcast, which, at the time, there was nothing else. This was really the only one that was talking about, like brain cancers and then young, like widowhood and widowerhood. For me, it was similar. It was a way of helping others, but I was also able not bypass so much, but I was kind of transferring. I'm going to focus on helping them because what else am I going to do? I either sit here and focus on my own grief, or I can turn around and I can harness this platform that's growing and blowing up and use it to just help everybody else and focus on them.
Right.
I can completely understand where you can kind of sidestep, some of the grief that you go through. I can completely see that. So to be able to pull that back is huge. But then in doing so, it also elevated a lot of the thoughts and compilation of what you were noticing as you'd been going through this whole process, because that turned into you writing a book.
Yeah, I know. It's kind of funny how it all has unfolded, honestly.
Yeah.
So yeah, the book kind of came to be. I had actually been thinking about writing a book for a long time, but and I had hired a coach. I had the outline. I did the whole 30-day book writing challenge. And then it just kind of fell by the wayside because my business was taking off, like the coaching side of it. And I just didn't have time for it. But then like a year later, an editor slipped into my DMs and said, hey, are you still writing this book? Like, I think you have a book in you. So do you want to talk or what? And I was like, yes, absolutely. And it was like the perfect time for it to happen because they had a clear vision for what they wanted. It wasn't exactly my initial vision, which I do hope to write at some point, but they wanted some like a self-help guide to grief. Essentially, they had looked at my website and they were like, honestly, like what you talk about here and what they were referencing were the programs that I had run, which were Move Through Grief, Grow Through Grief, and Thrive Through Grief, which in my book, that's how I have it. Those are the sections, some of the sections that I have broken up, and then Frozen I added, which is really about kind of that first, I would say couple of months to the year of grief where you're just kind of in this paralyzed state of being. But yeah, and then I was really passionate about wanting to weave my story into it because for me, the way that I write is I write about something that I'm struggling with and then I pull out the lesson and then I teach it to others. So it felt really important to have that kind of woven into each section.
Now the title of the book for everybody who's listening is called Love and Grief: Finding Healing, Meaning, and Purpose in Life After Loss. I have this book. It's a beautiful book. It has definitely helped me and it's given me different thoughts on how I want to communicate to everybody when I'm talking about grief and loss myself. And there's an interesting chapter in there that you really dive into. You go through a lot of different coping strategies, which from somebody who's got a social work background to begin with, irony of all ironies, I was certified as a trauma therapist before I moved into media. Go figure.
I love that.
And spent 10 years in the field, and you think I would have been able to help myself, but yeah, that doesn't work like that. And you get into this one section where you talk about the dual process of coping with bereavement. Can you go into that a little bit? What is dual process? What does that actually mean? And how can that help people cope?
For sure. I love this model. So this was a model that I learned about from David Kessler's grief educator training program, and it's Strobe and Schutz's dual process of coping with bereavement. And there's a lot of different models that try to talk about the grieving process. It's funny, but I think if you kind of look at all of them, you can kind of pull pieces that apply to you. But what I like about this one is that they talk about like the bereavement activities, which are kind of, what you need to do to grieve what was. And then they also talk about the restoration oriented activities, which is all about adapting to what is and reinvesting in what will be. And the way I think about it is after you lose someone you love, you're kind of at this crossroads of like in the middle between the life that was and kind of standing in the life that is and dipping your toes into the life that will be. And that's what this model talks about. So like some days I feel like you're kind of dancing in the grief, like you're active in your emotions, you're feeling guilty, you're questioning like how you're still here. Maybe you're looking at your loved one's belongings. You're still feeling very like attached and connected to the life that was. And then some days you're like, all right, I'm going to go over into the restoration side, into adaptation. And you're getting curious about what life might look like as a solo mom, what jobs I might be interested in doing, getting extra childcare and support, right? And so I just see grievers kind of going in between these two worlds, and we have to. I mean, that's what integration is.
So it's interesting that you talk about this because as we're sitting here talking about this dual process, which really is, and the best way I can describe grief to people, extreme grief like this, is it's a labyrinth. Through each of those turns and corners, as you're trying to navigate finding a way through the maze, you're butting up against different versions, different things, and you're counterbalancing all the time. It sounds like that's what this dual process, it's really finding that balance between getting through what was and healing from what was and trying to have hope for what is and what could be. And part of that, and you talk about this in the book as well, is secondary losses.
Yeah.
And the reason I want to put some emphasis on this and talk about this is because nobody talks about secondary losses. They talk about it as much as they talk about infertility and grief. So it just doesn't, nobody talks about this. I'm curious, what advice you have for people that, whether they're widows or widowers, when they're facing those secondary losses, because I have really struggled immensely with those
Mhm.
secondary losses and just didn't see them coming. And it really got to the point where I became the punching bag for other people. It just wasn't fair to me, and I didn't know how to handle that. The only thing I knew to do was to forgive, even if they don't know they were forgiven, or to let it go and just say that I love them so much and I'm just going to keep the door open if they ever want to come back.
Right.
There are a couple people. There's a friend that, I don't even know how to explain that
It's so
loss.
hard.
Yeah. But for, everybody else, but it just blindsided me. I mean, it
Right.
really, because it was pretty immediate. It was within the first few months. And it's like, I'm already dizzy and struggling and having an out of body experience. And I have no idea whether I'm coming or going. I don't remember what I said, let alone what I ate, the day before.
Yeah.
I'm in this really dark place. And yet now I'm getting abused and punched in the face and in the gut by these people that I've never had an issue with, that I thought loved me no matter what, that have been in my life for over 20 years. So what advice do you have for others that are going through that?
Yeah. And I'm sorry that you had to go through that in addition to your loss. And I'm sorry that so many grievers have to go through this as well.
It's more common than people realize.
It really is. Yeah. So what I'll say to that is, secondary losses are kind of those unanticipated losses that you experience in addition to the primary loss of your person.
Mm-hmm.
And if you think about it as like the primary loss is kind of like the pebble going into a lake, and then it sets off a ripple effect of other losses that you experience, and you're experiencing them, and then anyone else that person touched in their lives is experiencing them as well.
Mm-hmm.
So I think one of the ones that you're kind of referring to is like the loss of the family dynamic or the loss of the friendship dynamic, because the whole dynamic changes with the person who died once they're gone, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so it's like the glue, it shifts. So you might experience losing friends, you might experience losing relationships with mother-in-laws, like other people in your loved one's family, because that dynamic has just changed so much.
Mm-hmm.
So relationships, but you also might experience more subtle ones like the loss of identity, the loss of purpose, the loss of daily sharing with someone, right? Like being able to call your person on the phone. These are losses that other people can't see. So it's really hard for them to understand, but they just feel so alive and material to the person who is going through them.
Mm-hmm.
Loss of, the shared future, loss of having someone to make decisions with, loss of the future together. So what I say for coping with these and for dealing with these is to treat them as you would a primary loss. Name them, write it down, make it material in some capacity, and like allow yourself to really grieve this part of your loss just as much as the person, him or herself.
Let's pull that into the framework of going through like the holiday season. Obviously, there's triggers for everybody. And once you've lost that your primary person, your spouse, your significant other, your partner, and then you've had these secondary losses, especially in those first few years, I would say after. I know for me, the holidays are just immensely difficult, especially because Mike and I were married right before Christmas. Like my birthday is right after that. He died right before Halloween. Then there's Thanksgiving. It's all kind of like jumbled up. Literally wrapped up together. For people that are going through those first few holidays and they've had these secondary losses, and that dynamic has now changed. And now you have those traditions are all completely gone. They're different. You're trying to now reorganize what those traditions are going to look like going forward, or who you're spending holidays with now going forward. What advice do you have? Like what steps or, strategies can people take to kind of navigate those first 2 or 3 years of dealing with that?
Yeah, absolutely. The holidays are so hard. I mean, for people during the holidays, well, first of all, what I want to say is I think, again, because these secondary losses are invisible to people who haven't experienced a loss, you as the griever we kind of create a story that like our grief is a burden, and we feel like we shouldn't be as sad as we are, right? It's the season of joy and we should be merry, right? So we put a lot of pressure on ourselves, I think, to try to get into like the high vibe frequency when the holidays are like the hardest part. So I say, remember that your grief is not a burden, number one, and that these secondary losses are very real and they're normal, they're material. I mean, you kind of said like no one to do the traditions with, no one to plan with, no one to wrap presents with, cook with, shop with, attend to parties with, like it's all on you. And so just giving yourself the grace that it's okay to feel this way. And that the reason why you're putting pressure on yourself is probably because the outside world just feels so different. I just always tell grievers permission to like not do the holidays the first couple of years. Number one, no one is forcing you, right? And I don't think that I really did. I think I kind of told my parents, hey, can you help me make the holidays merry for my kids, but I'm going to go ski alone. And remember that what you need now isn't what you're going to need next year or even the next year, but taking it like one holiday at a time. What you need this Thanksgiving might be different than what you need on Christmas or Hanukkah, right? Grace, compassion, honesty with what you need. Define that first, and then you can start to communicate that to other people. Some people are going to be really understanding. Some people aren't. For the people who aren't, boundaries, right?
Absolutely.
And I get how hard this is to do because when you've lost someone who you love, your sense of self-confidence is shattered, and you feel like you're looking for all of this validation and permission from outside of yourself, but you're likely not going to get it because everyone else just wants you to be happy. So you have to kind of remember that, right? And come back home to you. What do I need? How do I get it? And a lot of it is communication. Yeah.
We're going to switch gears because this is an area I really want to dive into. You've been talking a lot lately about dating after death. Losing a spouse creates a very, very different journey than other forms of loss when it comes to being back in the dating world. What were the biggest challenges for you when you opened yourself up to dating and allowed that in? 'Cause I can tell you it scared the crap out of me.
It is definitely scary. And I feel like I could list like 100 challenges, but I will keep it. I narrowed them down. So the hardest one for me, I think, was knowing how to talk about being a widow and my loss on a date. I mean, not many 32-year-olds have lost a parent, let alone a spouse. And it would come up on the first date because I had kids. I whenever I talked about it, it just felt like a bomb would go off and the person, at the bar with me or at the museum, wherever, like my prospective date, they just wouldn't know what to say. And I think because I was already so insecure in my story and in my widowhood status, it just made me feel even more isolated and alone and perpetuated that story of who's ever going to want me like this, So that was really hard for me. I also found that as I got deeper into relationships with guys, I would compare them to my late husband. Ian died at a time in our lives where like we had 2 young kids, like we were just starting out. It was like the golden age, right? And so I think we tend to idolize the people who die. We forget that they're human too. And he was kind of like my gold standard. So it was really hard to not compare new guys. So I'd find myself, there might be someone who was very different than Ian, but who might have been aligned for me because I was different too. But I had a hard time accepting those differences because I made it mean that they were wrong.
It's like seeking, it's like just finding something to say no.
Right. And then I think also just opening my heart up to love again.
And that is not easy. That is, we can say it till we're blue in the face, but actually doing that is not easy.
Yeah. You can convince yourself, but like your heart, it's like your heart has a mind of its own.
Some of my closest girlfriends have told me many times, they're like, first of all, because I would say, oh, I'm out there. I'm out there. I'm socializing. I'm doing all this stuff. And they're like, Shannon, you're not out there. You're at events. You're going to galas. You're working. You're working out there. You're not out there socializing. And I'm like, but, I'm talking to people. And my one girlfriend, we were at this huge event. And she came up to me afterward. And a couple of guys had come up and were talking to me. And she walks up to me and she puts her hand on my shoulder. And she whispers in my ear, she's like, your wall is like cement thick. She's like, I can see across the room. And I go, I don't know what you're talking about.
It's so funny.
And she's like, the minute a guy comes up, you're like, fuck.
Putting up the vibes. That's awesome.
And it's really like, when I finally decided I was going to try to open myself up a little bit, I butted up against, it was like a deer caught in headlights when they heard me say that I was a widow, because I was a widow at 43, so still really young, and we were in the prime of life and getting ready to expand our family, and then I had one individual who was trying really, really hard. He really wanted to connect, and so he wanted to compare he found his soulmate, they got engaged, they ended up not getting married, and that's the same thing.
Yeah.
I felt like I was becoming a bit of a counselor in the situation to like, in order for you to kind of move on about, well, it's the same thing, loss is loss. Loss is loss. That's what I heard.
Oh.
Loss is loss. And that's when I was like, okay, I gotta go.
Right.
I gotta go. Navigating this is really difficult, but what's even more difficult is when you realize that your heart is truly ready for someone.
Yeah.
So talk about that a little.
Well, absolutely. I think when I first started dating, I didn't know if I was ready or not. I just kind of put myself out there because I was lonely. I felt like I was able to like date pretty casually, meet people. And it wasn't really, I didn't start to notice that I was more closed off until I started dating someone who could actually be a compatible match for me. I would say compatibility has been another big topic that I've worked on. And that's really getting clarity around like what I want so that I can find someone who is aligned for me now. But I think as soon as I met like my partner is where I started feeling resistance in my heart. And I'd be like, WTF, like this guy is like perfect.
I'm fighting this.
You're like I could literally, it was a physical sensation. Like my chest would tighten. It would just feel like I had this like block. And so I did a lot of somatic work around this. I hired a coach to help me. We basically fell into the sensation, and what that sensation was, or what we identified it was, is fear. Obviously, right? But I think consciously it's like, I'm okay, I got this. But our the body keeps the score. We store trauma and emotional memory in our bodies. So my heart still didn't really trust that. So the way that I was able to finally open my heart again was to go back and grieve even more, because what that was doing was allowing me to make peace with the pain.
Interesting.
Right?
Yeah.
So by making peace with the pain and being like, and it's almost like it gave like a permission slip or like a green flag to my heart being like, you can do this. Like you're capable of feeling the depth of this pain. So I'm going to allow you to let some love in. And if you think about it, David Kessler always says grief and love are inextricably intertwined.
Yes.
You can only avoid grief by avoiding love.
Yes.
So it makes so much sense.
Yes. And the thing is if you decide you want to avoid grief, then you're missing out on so much.
To me, it was like I was incapable of opening anymore until I actually went deeper into my grief.
Yeah. You have to really walk through that. And I've always told people, I'm like, the idea of opening your heart, it's not so much erasing or removing or replacing this massive amount of time and love that you had with somebody else, or this journey that you had. You're not getting rid of all that. It's just creating a little bit more room. It's like the Grinch whose heart grew 2 sizes.
Exactly.
Like,
or if you think about it with kids, it's not like you love one more than the other. Exactly. It's like your heart expands. It makes more room. There's more love. There's more capacity.
Yes. And the one thing I noticed, even though I knew I didn't want to be alone forever, and I don't want to grow old alone. I'm still really young. I don't want to go through the rest of this life by myself. I needed to be okay being alone. I didn't want to just be with somebody for the sake of being with somebody.
Yeah.
And I feel like there are a lot of times where, especially for women, they get caught into that cycle where they just get so scared of being by themselves that they settle.
Yes.
And that is really challenging, because it's not that. And I've had people say, well, it's because you hold Mike up on a pedestal and because nobody's going to compare to him. Well, guess what? Nobody is going to compare to him, because he was the love of my life and my best friend. However, I'm not holding anybody on a pedestal. What I'm doing is I'm setting a high bar for me because I deserve that.
Yeah, I love that. I could not agree with you more.
Right. And that's a challenge. That is a challenge for a lot of people because they just get so scared about what if.
Absolutely. I found myself in a similar position.
Yeah.
I mean, I think the first, like I said, like the first thing that crossed my mind when Ian was dying was like plug another guy in his place, which is like crazy. But it was like that fear of like raising a family on my own, being a solo mom,
even handling finances.
Yeah.
All of this life is scary when you've done it with somebody else for so long, and all of a sudden now you've got the mortgage and the bills and fixing things, and especially as a woman being taken advantage of when you've got contractors that are coming out and all of that. Yeah, it scares the crap out of you.
And it runs against our programming too. Like we've all been taught at a very young age. Like I know for you and me, we grew up with like Disney, like fairy tales. Like I've been wanting to get married and have a family since I was like, 5? So, so this like new image of like solo mom of 2, I'm like, no, thank you. Like, let's find my Prince Charming now.
Yes.
So yeah, like having to like go against that and really be like, I actually am totally capable of doing this on my own. And if I want to share my life with someone, then great. Like that's added bonus. But like, I can do this. I'm enough. But like, I was really worried about my kids. I was like, I know I'll be fine, but like my kids, right? That's more grief, more loss for them. I talked to my therapist about it and she's like, the worst has likely already happened for them. And you can't protect your kids from any hardship that they're going to face in life. And it just, I don't know, it just kind of like allowed me to like relax and exhale. And I was like, you're right. Like I can't control the future, but what I can trust in is like in my ability to weather the storm and give my kids the skills to access the resilience and the grit and the grace that they need to do it too.
And I think that that's vital. I think that whether you've gone through a significant loss or not, so many times I had people say to me, how did you and Mike last for nearly 20 years? We were married 13 of those 20, but we were together for 20 years, nearly 20 years. And they're like, how did you even make that work? And I said, I can tell you right now that falling in love and meeting somebody are the easiest parts.
Totally.
It's everything else that comes. I mean, my parents have been married for 52 years. That doesn't happen easily. It is hard work. And no matter what your journey has brought you to, it's always maintaining a healthy relationship. Like you're showing up for the relationship all the time.
Yeah. And here's the thing too. Blended family life.
Yes. Brady bunching it.
Just going to drop a little stat. 70% of blended families fail.
Yeah.
And I've been reading more about it, and it's because I think we go into it with these like high hopes and expectations that it's just going to go smoothly. But really like it's 2 different families of origins, different dynamics, different histories, beliefs, like a family they're already so complex on their own. So merging the 2, there's just a lot of complexities.
I really do think that it's growth. And I think that, that's one of those dynamics and one of those situations where it's also constantly putting you in the present moment.
Totally.
And being present with what's here right now is what we're going through and what we're doing. And we love each other and we're growing together and we're doing this now. And so focus on that.
Yeah. And can I share one more thing? Like, one thing that's been hard again is like going back to having fallen in love like twice, right?
Yes. Yeah.
The first time around as an 18-year-old is so different. I'm now 38 with kids, blending families, right? Like there's just a level of magic that the first one is always going to have that the second one doesn't, because we have to have real hard conversations.
Yeah.
And this idea of like the one, I'm like, does it exist? I don't know. Or do you just make the choice to love because this person is compatible enough? They've shown you that they're willing to support you in your dreams and your visions and truth in life, and that you are able to reciprocate that for them, right? Like, I don't know, like I'm just being really honest with everyone.
No, and those are the hard questions, right? That you have to ask because like you said, you were 18, I was 23 going on 24. At those stages in life, you've never really been in love. You don't know what that is. And, I believed in a soulmate and, that forever person. And I did find it. I did have that in Mike, and I was blessed enough to have it. And it was magical. And beautiful. And I mean, obviously we had our ups and downs throughout the course of the relationship, but we weathered it. We got through it because we were each other's best friend. But it is different because you're also a different person now. So you've gone through this whole journey. You're now in your late 30s, your early 40s. You're a different version of the person you are. You're not that 23-year-old or 18-year-old anymore.
Right.
You're an adult who's gone through really hard life experiences, and that's going to make the way you navigate a second love different. It's going to feel different.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So yeah, I don't know if that answers your question.
I have a feel we're going to just have to have another, we're going to have to do another one. We're going to have another
TBD.
show. All right. This one question, this is for all of our non-widow and widowers out there. What advice do you have for those who are dating or would be open to dating someone who is a widow or a widower that has never gone through that experience?
I like to say, stay open and curious. If you don't understand why, say you're dating a widow and she doesn't want to take off the memorial earrings, that are dedicated to her late partner, like it doesn't mean that she doesn't love you. It means that she's grieving. And I guess what I want to say, sorry, let me just summarize my thoughts more, is stay open and curious. Ask questions, don't assume, don't criticize, right? Like talk to your person about it, because grief is so misunderstood. And there's probably a valid reason behind why she's feeling a certain way, why she's doing something, right? So I just say openness and curiosity is like number one.
Don't be scared.
Don't be scared. Yeah. Ask the hard questions. The elephant in the room. That's like the worst. When an issue arises, it doesn't just go away by avoiding it. We address it, confront it, lean into it. And I think you'll find that a widow or a widower will gladly meet you there. They're looking for that invitation.
Absolutely. Oh, Emily. This conversation could just go on and on and
I know.
on.
There's so much. So
much. So I for everybody out there, I am definitely going to have Emily back on the show. We are going to have more conversations. But in the meantime, where can they look up your information? Where can they order your book if they want? And, do you have any retreats like in the winter, maybe going into the next year that you might be developing that people might be interested in?
Yes, for sure. So you can find me on Instagram and on TikTok, Emily P. Bingham. My website is movethroughgrief.com. My book, Love and Grief, is available on any major book site, Amazon, Barnes and Nobles. It's also on my website.
Can people check back on the website? Will you be updating that for new retreats that are coming up?
Absolutely. Yes. Website, social media, it'll all be there.
Okay, great. Well, thank you so much for joining us. And for everybody that's listening, I will have all of this information up on my website. And as new retreats and information gets posted, I will also have that up on all the social media platforms. Thank you so much for joining us and sharing your wisdom with us. It is always beautiful to hear your thoughts. They're always so raw and so earnest.
Always so raw. That's right.
So raw. I love it.
Thank you, Shannon. I appreciate you having me on.
And with that, we will be right back. Let me tell you guys about the financial advisory team over at Alliance Advisory Group. Frank Randall, Landon Bryce, and Dan Schleen help clients achieve life goals that make a generational impact for families. They thrive to be a resource for individuals to achieve financial success. They take a new approach to planning for all of your future needs. With offices in Buffalo, Rochester, and Jamestown, you can take the first step to personal financial confidence today. Learn more at allianceadvisorygroup.com. As we get ready to close out the year, I've been reflecting quite a bit on what 2024 has brought me. And I will say that 2024 has been a very trying year. It's had a lot of really amazing moments, as well as some really challenging times, both in career and in my personal life. What I'm realizing is that this journey of grief, this journey of loss, this journey of life brings with it many ups and downs. And we can't expect life to just be easy all of the time. The other thing I have to remind myself of quite frequently, and it's a theme I've been seeing quite a bit in many of my close friends' lives, difficulties come in different forms. For some, it's mental health challenges. For some, it's serious illness and disease. For others, it's loss. For some, it's financial woes and stress, loss of career, job, house. And yet for others, it's parental worries, friendship worries. This year seems to have brought a lot of struggles to a lot of people that I'm close to. And it reminded me just how fragile this life truly is. When we think about all of the things that go wrong in life, all of the things that bring us stress and strain and worry, the one thing that we can count on is that we will find a guiding light. We will find a way through. There is no guarantee for any of us that we will get through this life unscathed. But what we can count on is each other. What we can count on is finding and navigating a way through hard times, and that good times will follow as long as we let them. It's not easy. The other thing that I have been learning is, for as much as work at times can be a struggle, life is still very precious, and life is about so much more than the work that we do. Our work doesn't define us. We are so much more than the output of what we put out in the world through our skill sets and our work. We are heart, we are love, we are kindness, we are patience, we are so much more. So this holiday season, as we get ready to end one year and begin another, I invite all of you to take stock of the good moments and the good things that you have in your life, to look around, to take a moment to breathe and be present in the things that have brought you even a small amount of joy among the hardships that might be going on in your life. I also want to invite you to please write to us as we begin a very short hiatus, as we do every year between seasons. I would love to hear from you, our listeners and our subscribers. What would you like us to talk about in Season 5 of Game On Glio? What do you want to hear from us? What questions do you want us to navigate? What issues do you want us to tackle? Tell us what you want us to cover, and maybe your questions or the information you are seeking will be on one of our shows. Write to us at gameongliopodcast@gmail.com. Follow us on Instagram at Game On Glio Podcast or on Facebook at Game On Glio. You can write to us, you can DM us, you can Facebook message us. I promise you we will get back to you. We will reply, we will respond, we will answer, and we will collect all of the questions or information that you send to us for Season 5. We would love to hear from you. Until our next season, I am wishing all of you a happy Hanukkah, a Merry Christmas, and a joyous, blessed end of 2024. You've been listening to the Game On Glio Podcast, the podcast that is designed to educate, advocate, and tell the real stories of those walking the journey of brain cancers such as glioblastoma and grief and loss. Like what you hear? Share us with others. Follow us on Instagram at Game On Glio Podcast, Facebook at Game On Glio, or visit our website or YouTube channel. You can find us anywhere podcasts are played.